far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
All right, good afternoon, chat. Welcome to our fireside session on financial literacy for every stage of life. We appreciate everyone who's joined us today. My name is Jermaine Dakers. I'm from or with TD Wealth Financial Planning. Happy to announce that TD has actually agreed to sponsor just this past Monday. So hot off the press, Monday rather, hot off the press. You're the first group to hear it, first group to know about it. So we'll be supporting and sponsoring the 100 ABC Women Group for the next 3 years. So lots of sponsorship, lots of good things to come. I'm hoping for a lot of collaboration. And so I work with financial planning. A lot of my job just has to do with finding out a goal, determining what my client's need is, and figuring out how we take what they have right now and build that using a variety of financial tools to help them meet that goal. And so, you think about from day one how important money is in all our lives, right? From the time literally that you're born until the time that you even pass, money's consistently an ongoing issue. And so today we want to talk about that, that financial literacy piece from every step of the way. We're hoping everyone will be able to take something away, learn from it. And when you're finished, please share your video, rather share the link, get this out to as many people as possible. To my understanding, we have approximately 600 women already in the 100 ABC Women's Group, which is just phenomenal. We want to keep that growing. In the next couple of years, we love to see that hit 1,000, right, and beyond and north. So, and today joining me as my panelists, three wonderful ladies, three brilliant ladies. I have Anika Ford, Latoya Belfon, and Dr. Karine Cohen Sanchez. I'm going to read a bit about each of them for you, and then we're going to jumpstart our conversation. So for Anika Ford is a mother of two, an investor, and PhD scholar in sociology, serving as director of research and programs with the Jean Augustine Chair in Education, Community, and Diaspora. Her work examines decision making, life trajectories, and opportunities, how they are shaped by social capital, cultural reference points, and structural access. She is the founder of Ford Consult Group and an investor, building ventures and frameworks that translate knowledge into economic mobility and generational wealth. Also joining us is Latoya Belfon. Latoya is an award-winning, four-time best-selling author, publisher, and thought leader whose work amplifies Black voices and transforms storytelling into lasting cultural and economic impact. Her leadership bridges literature, education, and entrepreneurship to build platforms that empower individuals and strengthen communities. And last but not least, we have Dr. Karine Cohen Sanchez. She's a scholar, consultant, and the founder of Karine Consults, specializing in governance, institutional accountability, and equity focused policy. Her work explores how systems, policies, and organizational norms shape access, decision making, and, of course, outcomes. Through her research and advisory work, she helps institutions translate policy commitments into practical, measurable impact with a focus on equity, leadership, and sustainable change. So, certainly a rock star panel today. I want to hear from these lovely ladies. And so, I'm going to begin with Anika. I had mentioned earlier that money is important to us right from the beginning. Can you tell me, what role do you think parents and early household environments play in shaping a child's relationship to risk, money, and long-term wealth building?
Thank you so much, Tremaine, for having me and also for the question. As a mom of two and eldest of seven younger brothers, this is a really big question. And also having engaged hundreds of youth in my role as director. Arguably, I think parents and early household environments are foundational because they shape what most of us would call like our children's economic orientation to the world. But long before any formal financial education, children are always learning through observation, through silence, and through everyday decisions, even when we as parents don't even think that they're watching. They learn a lot from watching. And so they're also learning about what's possible based on perceptions of their educators as well. So if a child grows up in environments where money is always associated with stress, instability, avoidance, they often internalize a scarcity mindset and also low tolerance for risk. And sometimes that's not even intentional. But on the other hand, if they're exposed to conversations about the constraints as well. So it's not just modeling like abundance, but it's also being realistic and having open conversations with our kids about what our reality is and where we're hoping to get to. And also introducing conversations around investing and planning and long-term goals, even in very modest households. And I would also say that in schools amongst their peers and educators, because we know kids begin to see money as something that can be managed, grown, and leveraged, not just thinking about money as the outcome. So, what is critical here, I think, is that families are not just transferring money or thinking about what can I pass down financially, but also the mental models about what's possible when we think about money as tools, not just goals to achieve. And I think to round up, I mean, Additionally, we pass on what we pass on, we know shapes how our children understand things like time and opportunity, which are so significant when we think about the future in terms of decision making, financial stewardship, and even just decision making long term. So, whether it's something to fare or something to navigate strategically, I think is so important. I come from, like, I'm the first generation everything in my family. We came from very modest background. And so, like, equally important is exposure. Where I was doesn't mean that that had to be where I was going. And also, where I was is just as important as how it informed and helped me make decisions along the way. So, like, our children included in conversations about financial decisions, even when we're in difficult situations. Do they see examples of ownership, investment, or entrepreneurship even outside of our household? Or is money treated as something like inaccessible, something to be really afraid of? Because there's a huge emotional layer, both having and not, which carries meaning. Fear, pride, shame, control. All of
Mm.
that is like emotionally encoded and often drives behavior more than knowledge. And we see that, like, as an adult now, like, I think about that in my, like, in my own decision making. When does fear or scarcity show up? When am I making a decision based on, oh my gosh, I don't want to experience what I once experienced as a kid, versus am I making an informed decision? So when we talk about wealth building, we're not just starting at adulthood or thinking about just way into the future. We're starting in the home where mindsets, behaviors, and boundaries around possibility are first formed. And then, speaking to hundreds of youth, as I mentioned, in high school and university, we are increasingly seeing and hearing students speak about their futures with money at the center without really understanding what to do with it, even when they have very little. Their jobs and also returns on their investments in terms of, like, just their time and their ideas, not just a return as on an investment that you put into the stocks, right? So I think having these conversations that help us to think about the short and long term and the realities of what our young people are really thinking and labeling as wealthy is a significant entry point that we can't just, like, simply look at from a place of scarcity, no matter how real that experience is. Because, to close up, I mean, TikTok and Instagram, these are the platforms that are making it really, really hard for us to compete in terms of knowledge bearers, if you will, or parents that have seen a lot, right, with our young kids, because they take social media as the truth. And so we really need to grapple with what they're exposed to and bring those into the conversations so that it's grounded in a reality that is much like their own versus what we thought of like 20 years ago or just what we experienced.
Thank you, Anika. That was a very, very thorough answer. I think back to even me as a, coming up as a kid, and I think coming from modest means as well. And so just, your parents always saying save, 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 but not necessarily, them being first generation Caribbean coming to this country and not understanding all the tools that were out there, all the things that were there to make money, right? And how that shaped my behavior for a long part of my life until I kind of got into the financial world myself. And so, Latoya, I'd like to pivot to you and ask, how did your childhood experiences then shape your relationship with money, and how has that influenced the way you build today?
Thank you so much, Jermaine. And thank you so much, Anika. I think I will just bridge on to Anika's thought or observation on that. It was learned for her as well through childhood by observation. We learn these habits and mostly so many things and everything actually as a child based on what we see, what we hear, and what we experience at home. Mothers, fathers, caretakers, parents, grandparents, we're the first teachers. So for me, early on, I learned that if I didn't have it, where could I find it? In that provision was not always having cash in hand. So
Mm.
sometimes it is a skill, it was creativity, wisdom, and the courage to act. And I felt like my mom taught me that instantly. There was a time like she would remind me, and I would remember saying to her, one minute, I grew up modest as well, and I'm from the Caribbean as well. One minute it would be like we didn't have, and then we had. So,
Yeah.
I should be like,
Yeah.
I'll be back, should have boxes and things like that. And she
Mm.
would go, and then we would have. So my little mind was like, okay, we didn't have, then we had. So one day I asked her, I said, Mom, do you have magic? And she said, no. So I said, how did you leave the house when we didn't have and you came back and we had? So I started to ask these questions and then she would show me some of the things that she would do. My mom, whatever she could think about selling, she would sell. She can cook, she can sew, so she started using her skills and she would create whatever and go to the market and sell. And then we had money. She used that money to make food, to buy food to cook. Later on, my grandmother, there was nothing that she could not create. She sold every single fruit you can think about, preserved, dried, salted, not salted. She made everything you could think about with palm leaves, straw hats, straw bags. Like, and so when it came my turn, I instantly thought, okay, if I did not have it, what skill do I have and how can I reach my target audience? At that time it wasn't all of that lingo, but I learned entrepreneurship very early and I learned it from my surroundings. And I'm so happy for that. So, what I would do now with my own children, I have three of them. My little son, like I talk about this on other panels that I've been on, I instantly had him create his own story once I see that he was interested in what I was doing. He would come around and ask me, what are you working on? So I started just, encouraging his skills and his talents. And I showed him how he could take his idea and become one of my youngest authors. He became a best-selling author as 5. And now he has that intellectual property as part of his ownership. And so I'm teaching him ownership. And he goes to the bank. And so we start having these conversations about money, but also about ownership, what I can do with my skills, my talents. So I want to say, and I guess I want to also encourage and empower our audience who are listening that they're learning, as Anika said, either through TikTok or Facebook. Is either we relinquish the role of teaching our children for social media, or we get involved in the education process and intentionally create opportunities to learn. When I say intentionally create, I mean bring your kid to the bank and put them in an environment to understand, or bring
Yeah.
your kid to a situation where it opens up the dialogue of not only seeing, hearing, but experiencing a relationship with money.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Latoya. I mean, the word that just kept coming out to me while you were answering was just resourceful. I
Yeah.
think that's something when you come from modest means that sort of becomes a big thing. And it's the Caribbean way, right? You go to a
Yes.
market in any Caribbean city, and there's just a series, just a group of resourceful people
Oh, yes.
using their skills to flipping it to create real means and resources. So that's
Yes.
huge. And I think one of the big things that I heard in both your answers is as parents or as family members of community, we really have to take ownership of
Yes.
how we influence that next generation. We cannot leave it to TV, social media, etc. It's got to be us because we're the first group that they're looking. Whether we're saying it or we're acting it out, they're observing us. Now, speaking of resources, Dr. Kareem, financial literacy is often taught as a set of tools, but then access to those tools isn't always equal. How can we then ensure that financial knowledge translate into real opportunities across different communities and life stages?
So that's a very good and important question because it pushes us to think beyond knowledge and ask who is actually able to act on that knowledge. And I am
Hmm.
also from a Caribbean background, and I am also the first of everything. But I think the way money was introduced, it was out of fear. So until we change that mindset and we start not fearing money, we will start understanding it, embracing it as a means to an end in the society in which we live in. So in Canada, we already see that access is not equal. I think that's pretty obvious. For example, black households have some sort of the lowest, they have the lowest ownership. And it's not necessarily because they don't have the means. It's because a lot of the times when they go to bank, they're not approved. And there is a systematic relationship to that. Regions, especially at the Greater Ontario, and we could look at the stats online, rationalized Canadians are more likely to experience housing challenges. That's whether you're accepted for mortgages, accepted for loans to put towards your mortgage, different ways that we can go around the system. We're looking at 11.3% in that framework. So even when people understand budgeting, saving, and mortgages, the systems they are entering are not neutral. So we have this idea of presenting the system as if it's a neutral system. I've written about that before. These are structural barriers, like, who decides what is credible? Even if you meet everything on paper, are you credible for what a bank would determine to provide you with a mortgage? There is an invisible analysis that's done that we're not aware of, that is done in the back. And that is not to say that, that is not to say that we shouldn't try. I think that we should continue the process in which we're continuing, but we have to find different means in order to arrive at an end. So what I'm basically saying is, even if you don't get approved, even if things don't work out the way you have anticipated in your mind, there's different avenues. There is a lot of different banks that people are not aware of that don't even have interest rates. And we don't talk about these different avenues and it's
Mhm.
not only religious based. They can be advertised as a religious base, but they will provide you with mortgages and loan even if you're not part of that community. As long as you meet the criterias, and the criterias are not religious based because they can't discriminate against
Yeah, based
religion.
on right.
Yes. So that's something that is never spoken about. And that's what I said.
Mm,
There's so many different avenues in order to get where you need to get. It's just putting it out there for people to be aware of that. So first we need to understand the financial system in itself. And we could do that either through schooling, which is limited because I have my whole philosophy of what I think of the school system. But for the purposes of this panel, we do have to learn on our own in some aspects, and also through elderlies and also through experiences. But I would say not to internalize that as truth or reality because everybody experience is different. For example, my mom came here as an immigrant, was she was on survival mode her entire life. So her relationship with money was not positive. Her relationship with money is, I need this to feed my kids. And because I wasn't that, I was exposed to that, my relationship with money was not good at the beginning. I never viewed it as a positive thing. And when I started gaining wealth, I felt guilty and shame for it. So there's also these complexities within the Black community that we do need to overcome. It's not always external. A lot of it is internal, and it's okay to have wealth, and it's okay to pass it on to your family, and it's okay to educate other people about it. We have a shame that's associated with that. And we don't talk about
mhm.
it because I say there's a lot of invisibilities that goes on, and part of that invisibility is to maintain the narrative that we need to be in survival mode all the time in order for us to appreciate things. It's kind of a distorted way of looking at life. But once we decode and detach ourselves from that narrative, we start embracing and aligning ourselves with different forms of opportunities and networking. So integrating budgeting into your lifestyle. So even if you're on financial mode, we all know that Caribbean parents, my parents, we know how to budget. But we don't know how to budget in a safe way. We budget on a survival way, and that does interfere in the way we function. That's one thing. Connecting our financial systems to real life choices, teaching credit and debt simultaneously. We view, I don't know for you guys, but in a lot of Caribbean families, debt is like a sin. Like, we don't want debt. We don't want any debt. Don't take any credit cards. Da, 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 da. It's okay if you know how to manage it correctly. If you use debt to purchase assets and leverage off that asset, it's not a bad debt. It's the relationship of how we view money. And I think Anika spoke about that. And also, when we start understanding that we deserve things, we start embracing things differently in our lives. So I think overall, just to sum up, and not take too much time, we need to align education and different forms of education with real world systems. So if we teach people how to apply for mortgages, whether it's faced and also understand and teach them the barriers, but not the barriers aren't necessarily hindering because there's alternative ways to obtaining what you need. We're shifting from do people know and can people act on what they know within the system they're navigating? And I'll just end it there.
Perfect. Thank you, Karine. And you mentioned just how it's become a structural, sometimes an institutionalized barrier. I would actually comment now that TD is even partnering with 100 ABC Women. some of our earlier research as a company back in around 2019, 2020 came to some of those same conclusions that in a lot of situations, our Black clients were facing barriers when they went into the branches, or they didn't feel like they were, being taken seriously when it came time for loans and for credit. And as a result, we actually launched a Black customer experience group to target specifically, clients who felt like were going to be disenfranchised or to be marginalized, and they weren't getting that access. And I think that's a key part of it, like understanding, that structural barrier sometimes that is already embedded in institutions. So whether they recognize it or not, it's kind of already been there intrinsically, and that they need to come to the forefront. So I know we've stepped up that particular way to address that very point that you made. Now, Latoya, you built a series of businesses, programs, and platforms from your skills and ideas, just being super resourceful. Now, can you shed some light on how people can begin to see their gifts, knowledge, or their lived experiences as something that can actually be developed into income and create long-term stability?
Well, I also wanted to, as I trickle over to my question, I definitely wanted to say, Dr. Green, please let us know the banks without interest. And you can't drop that kind of knowledge
And
and
yeah, and just
yeah,
keep
okay,
by
people
it.
reach out. I'm going to be reaching out as well to Dr. Karin, and just to
Absolutely.
also just confirm, I had my hand up, but the educate. I'm a
Mhm.
teacher as well, with
Okay.
a couple school boards here, and when we
Nice.
teach about credit and debt, you would
Hmm.
not believe how attentive these kids are. In addition to that, I'm also a vice president of an organization, the Gemstar Circle of Excellence, and we teach financial literacy as part of our program. And that's one of the workshops that we cannot stop because grade 11 kids ask those questions. So, what I'm saying is, we have a community of students that want this information. And so, when Dr. Corinne posed the question on why some of these things are not in the curriculum, this is exactly why organizations such as 100 ABC Women and some of the things that you're doing is so important because clearly they want to know how to make better decisions. So I really love that. So when it comes to resourcefulness, as a part of my building. And you tell me an idea you have, I can tell you how to lay it down, how to pinpoint what to do, action steps, everything like that. I think often when people are thinking about how do I step into business or how do I step into, entrepreneurships and things like that, sometimes we're looking at the lives of others. I want to say, and I want to encourage everyone to look into your own self, your own skills, your own giftings, because another person's dream and drive could only take you so far. You're going to have to do the rest of the road on your own. So if you realize when COVID happened, and there's a certain people in our community started getting into entrepreneurship, and then everybody wanted to have a business. Ask those people how many of them have actually registered their business. Then you start to see who's really serious about what they're doing. And that shows you, if you're sitting right now and you haven't registered your business, are you serious about your skills and your talents and the time you're investing in your business? That's the first step for you as well as you're looking into the mirror. But then when I sat down to think about what I can do and how I can use my giftings, I went to research rich people. I went to research how they're doing it because they're also researching how the next rich person, a wealthy person,
Doing
is doing it.
it. Yeah.
The biggest
Right.
thing I learned was don't go try to make all the mistakes. Go find out the people who failed, and those are your best friends. Okay, so what did you
Mhm.
do? Failure is one of the best ways to learn. So the people who are failing at, oh yeah, those rich people, they're finding, oh, so what didn't work out? Really? What software did you try? Okay. Notes, 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 notes. So you did what? Oh, that didn't work. Okay. Notes, notes, notes. You do that research. So I started doing that research on how the mindset of some of these wealthy people, I follow Emma Gred, Follow the Wealthy, the podcast. I started learning from these people how to even sit down and think about what do I want to do with my skills and my talents, because I have a lot of them. And the first thing you learn, you can't do everything at 100%. You can't touch every market area. You have to figure out what is the best path for you. And that takes knowing your market, knowing your skills, your capacity. And I say this often every time I speak, make it a business to know yourself. Not because you have singing talents mean you want to have a business of singing when,
Right.
you right? So it's really knowing yourself as well. What skills can be productive and fruitful in the season of the economy I'm in? And how can I truly build a legacy off of this? Because I want to create a sustainable business and not something that is a pop-up idea.
Mhm.
I think I'll stop there.
No, no, you could have even kept going. There's just so much knowledge on
Yeah.
that particular topic, and I appreciate you just pointing out that, you know what, sometimes you can find inspiration from someone else, but that ability to continue and to win long term, at some point you're gonna have to dig deep, because there are those moments if you're a business owner and you're trying to build something up, no one's there, there's no hand clapping, there's no cheering section, it's just you, your ideas, and sometimes there's some dark days in business, right? And so understanding, like, if you're talking about not just acquiring something, but to actually maintain and then build on it, you do need that grit. And then you mentioned a thing I really like, that you're saying you're looking at people who are doing well because you know that they're looking at people who are doing even better than them. And the phrase that came to my mind is your network often determines your net worth, right? So I've been hearing that a lot, in the business circle. And so, Anika, I'd like to turn to you. You've been quiet for a little bit, so let's get you back on. Now, how can families begin to build intergenerational wealth? Right. So we're talking succession planning, and not just financially, but through knowledge, networks, mindset, regardless of their starting point.
Yeah, I think well, a few things. I need to acknowledge some of the sharings of of my fellow panelists here. Um,
Yeah.
First and foremost, I think like one, we all have gifts and talents, and we all have skills that are monetizable despite being told otherwise or being made to feel otherwise. And so a big part I think is like I think it's really important to acknowledge like how the relationship between shame and like the relationship between both shame and wealth in our communities. And for
Mm,
many of us, and Dr. Kareen mentioned this, but I think it's worth going back to because for many of us, especially in the Canadian landscape, we've paired like our visibility and success with risk and exposure. Like we feel more vulnerable because we're experiencing because we're building wealth or because we're doing well. And so, this is something we need to acknowledge, right? I'm not saying it should be a limitation, but we should acknowledge it and name it as a like it has operated as a strategy for many because we want to be self-preserving, right? And it like
right.
that's part of what we're thinking about is like, oh, I don't want to be too visible because God forbid, what if this and what if this, right? We know the cost of making a misstep is that much more higher. But to pair that with what Latoya had shared around failure, I mean, I love failure, so much so that like I do quite a bit of work and research on failure and failure actually as the world's most undervalued asset because we gloss over, oh, it's just grit, it's just resilience. Apps, it's not just. It's not just those things, right?
Mhm.
And so I'll save that whole conversation for another day, but failure is, I think, one of the world's most greatest undervalued assets, and we can actually capitalize on it. And we should be learning. In fact, Warren Buffett actually, in his annual reports, he would publish things that he did wrong, or the way I wouldn't even say what he did wrong. He would publish his learnings. So even the framing of what didn't work well to his investors was done on an annual basis. And
Mm,
that's something to just take away that like you're talking about someone who people study and don't even think to
right.
read his annual report to people who are trusting him with their money, their wealth. And he's acknowledging that here's what didn't perform as well as I anticipated. Here's what how we're going to learn. Here's how we're going to pivot. So that's not really to answer your question, but I really just thought it's really important that we name failure and name it
It's
upfront.
valuable.
It's really, really important because in our communities, the cost of not getting something right feels so heavy and it's so palpable and so relatable. So like grabbing that by the head is really important. And another thing is that, as someone, especially, I think this is very gendered as well. Women, we really want to be impactful and purposeful. And so when we're talking about money or when we're talking about investing, we know that women's decision making is actually quite different than our fellow males.
Yeah.
And so we can't mix up the idea that because you want to be impactful and purposeful, you can't also make a lot of money. Those two things are not in separate worlds and they're not in separate universes. So we need to make sure that I think within our communities is like we can do both and they should coexist and they can coexist. So with that being said, I'm going to answer your question. I'm sorry. Um,
Go ahead.
I'm so sorry, but I had to because, sometimes we're having
Go
all these
ahead.
conversations and like my PhD is in sociology and I felt a lot of shame about like sociology is about studying systems, inequalities, and
Right.
it's really shameful to be like, by the way, like I'm an angel investor. By the way, I'm building houses. By the way, I'm doing like,
Right.
by the way,
Right.
I'm doing these things. And I
Yeah.
really didn't show up fully myself because I didn't want people, especially my fellow Black people, to be saying to me like,
Hmm.
she's too or she's
She
too
said
this or
that.
she's too that. But you know
Hmm.
what the reality is? You're building and you're going to write the checks for organizations, for causes, for things that matter to us. And that's so, so important. And I think our young people need to see that. So why I say this is because intergenerational wealth is often misunderstood just purely as for financial. In reality,
Right.
it's multidimensional. It includes not just the
Hmm.
financial, it includes our knowledge, as you mentioned, our networks, our health,
Hmm.
mindset. All of these things happen before you even see any financial output. And so the starting point doesn't need to be, oh, I need to be high income. It needs to be, I think, intentionality, knowing your skills and what is monetizable, but also at scale, moving beyond just mom and pop, everything small. Own your bigness, own the big vision. Like families can begin by making money visible and discussable and possibility. So, like breaking the silence around just money is critical. But when children understand, and as a mom of two young boys, when they understand how decisions are made, even again, the very small ones, they begin to develop this like a financial consciousness, right? Like, what are the constraints? How am I making decisions? They want to launch a sock business. Do you know how much it's going to cost? Mommy and daddy can support you. We're going to loan you the money. Here's what it looks like and map it out. Do you know how to go to the store and ask somebody, would you allow me to film and record my session here? Put them out there, allow them to ask the questions because the risk is so low. If they say no, they learn how to like they can learn to deal with
Take
the
them
no,
home. Right.
right? Like
Right.
what will happen? You're not going to lose sleep. Like they're not going to lose sleep, right? So
Right. No,
like right, like this
not
is
at all.
time, right? Like we don't tell our kids and then tell them go try when you're 25 and you're now making a decision about your career.
Yeah.
Why
Try
can't you
to.
try now? Why can't you?
Yeah.
And this is when we're talking
Try
about
to.
failure, right? Like it's just learning. You have to build the muscle. So thinking about like, both, yeah, we talked about the income and building wealth and just even having financial cash flow, but again, the shift to asset thinking. And so it's not just about earning, but about ownership. Are you have a business. This is your money. This is all yours. You have to build this into something. So this could look like, again, small investments, exposure to business models, conversations, putting our kids out there, putting them out there. A 5, 6, 10-year-old telling a business owner, hey, can you do this with me? My like your kids know a lot. My kid said, oh, well, that means I'm gonna get a sponsor like they do on YouTube. They understand a lot more than we think, right? Like this is
Right.
real, right? So I think it's important that we give them a little bit more credit and allow them to build their networks early as well. There's no time limit and there's no time or entry point for kids to have these conversations and for us to have them with our kids. And I think just to close, that kind of connects to just again back to the networking or social capital as we say, right? Like your network is your net worth, but also just being social and engaging with people, not always from a transactional standpoint, but being able to converse, being able to be in spaces to have different conversations even when you don't know, and owning like, hey, I don't know this thing. Can you share more with me? How did you learn? Right? Access to the people, informations, and opportunity often compounds faster than money. Like Dr. Kring just said, free, like zero interest. What we don't know, we don't know. So this means
Oh, okay.
being deliberate about our exposure. You don't always know the question, but we can deliberately place ourselves in spaces where we know we don't know anything. So we're there to just absorb and be able to ask questions, right? So passing on that knowledge forward, I think, is probably like such a significant form of wealth, especially in a space like Canada where many of us are first generation. We have a rapidly growing immigrant population. So if you don't know the space and you go into spaces that you're just comfortable with, of course you're always going to have the same thing echoed back. Be in a space where you don't know anything at all and tell people, I don't know. That's why I'm here. That's precisely why I'm here. So I think just to close, like the question I would ask is not just what do we earn, how much money do I make, but really shift the conversation to what are we building? What are we transferring forward? Who do we need along the way at different stages and for different reasons and seasons along that journey? Because it changes and that's completely okay. But I don't think the question is how much do you want to make?
Thank you, Nika. Appreciate that answer. And I think I'd highlight the fact that if you build, to our audience, to our listeners, if you build, even a phenomenal structure and wealth and all of the above, but you haven't taught the other generation beyond just dollars and cents, the next generation will wipe that wealth right out, right? Through a series of mistakes that maybe they didn't need. And so understanding that value goes beyond dollars, right? But it can actually be people and resources. So on that thread, then, Kareen, as we think about building long-term wealth, what are some of the most important mindset or structural shifts individuals need to make today to create that financial stability for the future?
Um, Before I go into the question too in depth, I think we need to understand accountability and hold ourselves accountable sometimes. And
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with failing, but there's also a fear. And I go back to the concept of fear because that drives a lot of decision making. And we don't talk about that enough. And it could be a fear of losing money. It could be a fear of failing. It could be a fear like there's a gratitude and there's a longitude of way of approaching that. Until you come face with that fear, you will keep repeating the same failures. And I say this unquote because to me, there's no failing. They're all learning experiences. We have to understand what is our relationship with money? What is the, how do we see money? Do we see it as only as a mean of survival? Then right away you cannot, it will be very difficult for you to succeed financially because there's different ways of succeeding. Once you start shifting the way of thinking and you start looking at your relationship with what you consider successful and also how you consider your relationship with money and the institution in which allocates money. So we shifting the mindset over under focusing on structures and more focusing on mindsets. So it's important for individuals thinking long term to plan ahead and understand how small decisions can build over time. So one thing that we might think that is very minuscule in our lives, I don't know, putting 15, $20 away per paycheck can accumulate to a larger sum in total. The other issue is that a lot of us often we don't, there's a lot of pride in the Caribbean culture and in Black culture overall where we don't ask
Hmm.
for help. And that is related to fear. When I talk about fear, that's because the fear of being judged, the fear of being spoken, that we that's what I mean when I say fear. And that pride can be also very detrimental to your growth. And Anika said it well, like go to a store and ask, can I take a video? Like that you will not find my mom tell me that. Like she would be like, are you crazy? You don't go and ask these people these things. What's wrong with you? That is a
Hmm.
barrier. We don't see it because we're so consumed with being prideful.
Huge
Uh,
barrier.
Yeah, it's a huge barrier because that's not bad. But for some reason, it was construed as being a bad thing because we're asking for help. In a way, it's being manifested as if we're asking for help. But that's you're investing in yourself. That's not asking for help. That's an investment. So until we
Right.
change that way of thinking and approaching what we see as progress and success and relationship, uh, there's limitations that will be one of the barriers aside from the structural barriers. Um, so like I said, thinking long terms and small decision leads to larger decisions. For example, in Canada, we could go back to home ownerships. At the moment, we might feel that okay, we have to save so much because Canada, honestly, Canada is one of the
Most expensive.
I would to be completely transparent is in Canada is one of the highest rate to put a deposit to get a mortgage out of other countries. To be
Right.
completely transparent, so there's ways of building wealth outside of Canada, and that you can liquidate that assets and bring it back to you. We have to look
Right.
at the bigger picture. We can't look at our environment and think that's the end of it. And this is what we've been introduced to, and this is what it is. There are options. Until we understand that we have options, and it can expand from different countries, it can expand to different ways, we will limit ourselves by creating these barriers in our mindset. That's an opinion of mine. Um, I mean, Canada's mortgage rate is ridiculous. The fact that we need to renew it every 5 years is ridiculous. In the US, you get a mortgage one time and you never hear
30
from the
years.
bank.
Yeah, 30
It,
years.
that's yeah, but that depends what kind of mortgage you get. So
Right.
it's yeah, like anyways, I'm not gonna go into that. But on the
Mhm.
individual level, we're shifting from short-term survival thinking, like I said earlier on, to long-term
Mhm.
planning. So let's not focus too much on instant gratification. What can I get out of it now? What can I get out of it now? Think of it, how can I build this for the future? Again, it goes back to the mindset because instant gratification is a reflection of fear. Because we don't see the results right away, we cannot envision or see future success. So we have to change our ways of thinking, building consistency. We have to be consistent in any approach that we do. On the structural level, expand access to fair lending practices. That I don't that's something that is structural. Improving financial education that reflects real life condition. Again, that's a responsibility of the structures and systems in place. Creating systems that don't assume everyone starts from the same place. That is where
Mhm.
the neutrality component in a lot of the research that I do. There's a criteria in which they evaluate and determine if you're a good candidate or not, where they don't have any rooms for exceptional circumstances. And if they do, that is very subjective to the person that's doing the analysis. So if we incorporate financial literacy, it could be whether it's in school or just ongoing throughout your whole educational system, not just as theory but as practice and lived experiences, and have that reflect in the application process, that will change the way we view and understand the credit systems, how we apply for loans, how we evaluate financial risks, our understanding of risk and how we evaluate it changes based on how we are exposed to our relationship with money. It goes back to the fear component and how we make
Right.
decisions related to our current state. It's very, very hard when you're raised with a mindset that you're on a survival mode to take money and invest. That's not part of your process. It's like, I have this money now. I'm not going to
Need it
focus
for
on,
tomorrow.
you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to focus
Mhm.
on putting this away for 20 years and then maybe I'll make some money. Like that, just the way the notion of it is presented is false because it's an investment towards yourself. But again, that comes with the fact that we our relationship with institutions are not in proximity. There's a gap. That gap is where the fear is embedded because of the fact that you can get questioned a certain way. You could not get loans if you ask for loans. The way you're treated all creates this barrier, and then you become a victim of that barrier within yourself, and then you
Right.
replicate it. So I went into a little bit of psychology because the question does ask for mindset, but I think that there are two components to it, and I'll wrap it up. There's the one about taking accountability and changing our mindset, shifting from our belief systems to we deserve this, not shamefulness, not feeling like if we upgrade that we shouldn't be embracing that. And because there's also that component within the black communities, we
Right.
can't enjoy our wealth. We feel guilty for having the wealth, or we're ostracized indirectly or directly because we're not like helping everybody out. So there is this component to you got it, why aren't you giving it to me?
Right.
We know that. But
Right.
when nobody's responsible for anyone, but you're responsible for yourself. So you can't be holding other people accountable for your own financial progress other than yourself. And I'll end there.
Thank you, Karine. And I think to extend on that, so I mean, Karine's point here was essentially there's a two-part in the shift. A part of it has to be structural, the way the institutions run. But while they figure that out, the part that you can control, the accountability piece, you taking ownership of your own life, is the part you need to get on right now, right? And so in our chat, Don, our gracious host, actually highlighted a couple of things, and I took a look here. He says, so wealth is already highly uneven, and built over time. The median net worth of Canadian families right now is about $519,700. So say 520K. That's as of 2023. But if you had a home and a pension, so if you had purchased a property, again, delayed that gratification, and you also saved towards a pension, so you had some money, your median net worth increased from 520,000 to 1.4 million. But as time has gone on, if you don't have that pension, you don't have a property, so essentially you haven't thought about long-term assets, that actually decreases to an average of $11,900 in your net worth. Right, so that's a glaring difference, right? And a lot of that is controlled by your own behaviors, your ability to deny or delay that immediate need for gratification, and actually recognize that if time will come. We always say push comes to shove, and it feels like push always does come to shove. Like that time comes where you will need that resource, you will need assets, you will need money, and just preparing for that. And then to highlight your other point, agreeing that debt is actually across in Canada is a very difficult thing. Specifically across the G7 countries, Canada actually has the highest debt to income ratio at 185%. So that's a staggering number. So that means for every dollar you have, you owe $1.85, right? Like so, the young people
taxes we
say,
pay, the
right,
income
and
tax we pay
they
here. Sorry, I had to throw that in.
so that's a big part. And then the young people say, make it make sense. Right? For every dollar I've got, $1.85. Like how do we rationalize that? Like make it make sense. So the other thing I kind of had that I want to throw out to you ladies now, and this is free for all point. Now, how can we then use leveraging as a wealth building tool? So it's clear people are borrowing, and it appears from this type of borrowing, if it's at 185% debt to income, that there's no other asset on the other side to offset that on a balance sheet, right? So can we do better at using leveraging, or have you used leveraging in any way? What they call OPM. You might hear that being thrown around a lot now. Other people's money. How do we utilize that to build out some assets and build some long-term wealth, as opposed to just falling victim to this 185% of people who, or the 185% ratio rather of debt to income?
Well, I'm going to jump in quickly, I think, in the VC space. So I'll throw this
Yes.
out there because I think it connects a few different things. Ideas are fundable. Let's just start with that. And I say that
Okay.
because I think within our communities, we don't even know that that's a thing, right? So, like, you have an idea, and you're developing this idea more. There are incubators that just work with you just to get an idea validated and into a phase where you can then put together, if you will, a pitch deck to say, well, hey, is this a fundable concept? Is this something that's fundable versus this is just an idea I have that is just, for my benefit, in the sense of sometimes we think about a business and the business is really self-employment, and that's not venture backable, right? Like you're not going, most people aren't funding or writing checks just to pay one person's salary. But if it is an idea that is scalable, it can be backed.
Right.
And I also, the backdrop is that less than 2% of VC funding goes to women. And then if we talk about, if we're now racialized women, then that number is even lower. But there
Even
are
lower.
targeted initiatives and supports for Black women founders, launching businesses, validating ideas, and even scaling their companies, right? And so I think it's also looking for those opportunities. So I think, Jermaine, part of like that is the prime example of other people's money. Like the
Yep.
VC ecosystem is based
Totally.
on pitching an idea that uses other people's money to build out a company, right? But even just on the like, even at a very like a smaller scale than that, is seeking out grants, right? Grants is free money. You
Right.
don't have to pay
Right.
back, right? So there's
Mhm.
grants, there's programs like Shred. There are a number of programs that we do also have within the Canadian landscape that are accessible to us that can fund our ideas. Whether they're successful or not is not the question, but there are opportunities to be funded that does not require you to take a loan. Again, being in spaces where you don't know anything, being in rooms where somebody will guide you on how to write a grant because you've never written one before, you don't even know what a grant is. It's okay to say, I don't know what a grant is. How do I do this? I have an idea. Where do I go from here? Those are all very valid questions. And I think Dr. Kareen mentioned this is like, let's stop with letting the fear, and I say this because I've gotten stopped myself with fears, right? Like, oh my gosh, if I put this out there, what will people think? What will people see? Which is so closely tied with perception of failure, right? If I go out here, I'm going to fail to meet their expectations of me or what I've presented myself to be to them. And the cost of that is so high for us
Just
because we
to
spend so much time doing it.
support. Yeah.
Um, so I think like number one, your ideas are fundable. They're great. Be in spaces that allow you to have them nurtured more so that you can think beyond just the immediate, I just want to have an income right now for this thing. And again, I recognize the constraints of, our material reality is a constraint. If you can't pay your bills and you can't do the basics, it's very
Yeah.
hard to think about 10 years. Oh, this is going to pay off much longer down the road. But there
Yeah.
are also programs and supports for that. And so I would urge our community to look into the things that are available to us that are for free, just to see what's available. And yeah, so I think that that's one place just to start.
Perfect. Thank you, Anika. So that's for our listeners, grants, if you don't see yourself necessarily immediately able to get in front of maybe bigger angel investors, look for those free grants. There's tons of those that go unused every year simply because people just don't want to take that leap. And
And idea
often the very,
incubators and the idea incubators, Jermaine, like DMZ, all these,
yes.
there's Black focused incubators as well that people can look into. So yeah.
Right, where and the pitch competitions have become pretty famous in the last, or a bit more popular in the last, I'd say 2, 3 years. I've attended at least 4 or 5 myself. So, 5K, 10K, one of them, I was there and they gave away $100,000 to fund an idea. Now imagine the difference that that can make. So OPM and borrowing, which I think for our community in particular, as Black folk, has been just a foreign concept. I remember again growing up and it was always save, save, save. Don't owe a dollar to anyone. And I think it was more about freedom was what, our folks and our ancestors are talking about, just staying away from like being under the control. But if you use your debt wisely, you can turn that into future assets. You can turn it into wealth. You can turn it into money, and then pay that debt off ultimately, and then you can actually become the lender. Right? That's a huge level up when you go from borrowing to becoming essentially the bank. Right? Nothing sweeter than that. Then now you're investing and making money on money that you don't owe to anyone. So I hope our chat's listening. Those are a few realistic pointers. And then next, before we go to the Q&A from the chat, I want to ask you guys, what do you think the impact of a life partner is on selecting your wealth? Right, this seems to be a hot topic everywhere I go. But if you have a life partner, and in particular, because I'm talking to 3 Black women, it seems to be a hot topic that the Black women are finding more challenges meeting partners at the level that they've, ascended to and built themselves to. So, what are you ladies experiencing, and what's going on from your end? Let's start with you, Latoya. You're smiling, so I know you got something on your mind. Sure.
Anika was taking too long. I was looking down here. I was like, who's pressing? Dr. Kareem, where's your hand? Finger on the button. Okay. I'll
Yeah, go
come in.
ahead.
I'm married for 10 years.
Oh,
And my husband actually, my husband actually has been citing that I was an entrepreneur long before I wanted to take the leap. And I was like, just leave me alone. Entrepreneurs are always broke. Like, why do I want to be, that's what I was saying 15 years ago. Like, I don't want to be jumping from idea to idea.
right,
That was the idea of
right.
an entrepreneur. But he basically saw that skills in me because at that time I had a 4.5, and one of the apartments was a salon. And mind you, I was also in university studying to be a teacher.
Right.
I had probably 2 full-time jobs. And I said, okay, let's put some other these are skills to the test with doing hair and doing nails. So I was a diversified queen. I like to have revenue coming in from every area.
Multiple
That's
strings,
never
yeah.
going to change. And that could be survival instinct a lot, where you will not be able to catch me without income. You will not be able to make me homeless. You'll not be able to have me starving. Government,
Right.
whatever you have going on with the economy,
That's on
you're
you.
not gonna see me okay, I don't know
Yeah.
what's happening down there, but you're
But
not
I'm
going to
gonna be
see me
okay.
struggle in. So I've always been on a diversified revenue idea. That's where he saw me. So he saw that I had that business savviness in me. So when I finally took the leap, I call him Resource King because I would always have, okay, I want to do this, but I need this. Do you know software? Do you know a program? Do you know that? Do you know that? And he would always have the answers. So I say that all the time to say, I am who I am, but if I didn't have him with a lot of the ideas that I come up with, for him giving me that short, quick, try this program, try this platform, even with AI, when AI started coming more in the scene prominently 3, 4 years ago, a whole year he was telling me about how it could change things for me illustrated. And I was like, I don't need it. I don't want to do it. So I came onto the AI game 3 years ago, and I could have possibly been doing AI 5 years
So
ago
longer.
because of
Yeah.
him, right? So
Right.
it was really important for me. I'm always speaking somewhere. I'm in this workshop. I'm at this platform. I'm at this. If I did not have a partner who saw the value in what I was doing in the Black community, can see my giftings and be comfortable with me shining so brightly, I probably will not probably, most likely I will not be doing what I'm doing, and he's incredible. He's a best-selling author. He has businesses. He's a teacher. He has all this on the side, but he is also okay with taking time, setting up my laptop here for me, bringing me tea and water, while, the support is genuine and
Full
so
on
real when we
support.
build
Yeah.
together. So I say this, it's one of the most important decisions, mergers you
Yes.
can do,
Yeah.
is to
Yeah.
really think about your partner and really think about what they can offer you to help grow your dreams, your goals, but also what you can do for them as well. And understanding that compromise of dreams and goals, because everybody can't be number one running after their businesses at the same time.
Yeah. At the
When you
same
have
time. Right.
kids,
Right.
so we have to tag team. Okay, you're going for it on this. Okay, I'm gonna be back a bit, and so that our home stays balanced, and our kids still feel that united front. So yeah, really important.
Truly. Teamwork makes the dream work. Dr.
That's
Kareem, I
right.
saw you on mute. Were you going to say
was
something?
I was just gonna make a comment to when you have a mindset of a leader, you'll attract a leader. And
Okay.
to me, the equation is pretty simple. When you are surrounded by people who are like-minded, that see growth as many different facets, not just financial.
Right.
It could be
Right.
spiritual, it could be different ways and where you at in your life. And this is the notion is you have to be with somebody that is secure in themselves, because I'm not seeking, or I don't think anyone should seek validation through your partner. I think you have to be validating yourself to begin with, and then
Hmm.
then that partner is supposed to be adding to
Right.
to you, but not to be held responsible for you in terms, but cannot be draining you either.
Right.
There needs to be
Right.
that. But then again, if you have a
Balance.
mindset of a leader, you will attract that person if it to your circle. It That's just the way I view
You're
life.
saying, yeah.
Yeah, because it would become a conflict of interest. There would be a conflict of interest. If you're
Uh,
evolving and you're succeeding, there'll be a fragment. There'll be
yeah.
somebody,
Right.
like it would
Right.
become,
And I
yeah.
think that's what a lot of people have been finding sometimes, in particular, are successful Black women as they leap. Sometimes the partner's not as secure, and then unfortunately becomes a headbutting or like a challenge between the two. On okay, well, you're going too fast, too far, you need to slow down type thing. You don't want
That's
someone
not
who's going to
a,
dim your light.
but then he's not a leader.
He's not a
That's not
leader.
a leader. That's not the mindset of a leader.
I
Because a
guess
leader
fair.
you see, a leader shouldn't get intimidated by anyone's success because you're a leader on
Agreed.
yourself.
It should be empowering you to be the best
It,
version of
that's what
yourself.
I'm saying. Then you're not a leader. You're
I love it. I
that's
love it.
that's your
Anika, were you
thing.
gonna
That
say
belongs to
something?
you. That's your problem, not mine.
I think so. I think both of you hit some good nails on the head because it sounds a little cold because when I say it like this, people are like, oh my gosh, why do you say this? Like your marriage or your partnership is your first investment. Like this is a business, okay? So number one, like we're talking
Mhm.
about leadership, we're talking about value recognition. What are your strengths? What are the areas for improvement? And so first and foremost, like are you willing, when we talk about leadership, it's not just men that need to be leaders, right? But I think about in your partnership, Are we cultivating an atmosphere for growth? Are we cultivating an atmosphere where we can scale? Are we cultivating an environment of transparency? The same thing we talk about for multi-billion dollar companies
Business.
need to be
Mm-hmm.
present in your partnership. And so I think like that for me is really like that's just foundational. Like when I think about my marriage, it's like, are we holding each other accountable for our visions independent of one another and what we've thought through together for our life?
Yeah.
So, like Latoya said, you can have a lot of things. You can do a lot of things, but you can't do all the things all at the same time in
Same
this
time.
very moment.
Right.
And we know that if you're strategic planning, things take priority at different stages of the plan to reach the collective end. And while
Correct.
reaching that collective end, which changes and grows over time, there are
Mm-hmm.
milestones that have to be met by all team players. We are both on the same team performing very different functions, and I need to recognize you have your lane, I have my lane. I'm not competing with your lane. You're not competing with my lane, but guess what? When you start stepping back from what you need to be doing and coming into my space with it, which is an area you may not know, things get fuzzy, right? Like we don't do that. Like,
Business.
you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, why are we doing this? So
Right.
so, but we expect to be doing all of these things in the relationship. And then we're upset, right? We're upset that it's, oh my gosh, he said and she said. And I'm like, but have we sat with ourselves and taken accountability a little bit for what we're doing
So,
in our
yeah.
space, right? And I really think, especially for Black women, we talk a lot about, we talk a lot about like, well, we're not finding men who are leading us well and who are doing, but you don't find and seek out a partner to lead you to what you're supposed to be doing.
Mm.
You have your own gifts and talents. You have, and I'm going to bring in a little bit of faith in here because you know what? We talk about being submissive and oh, can an independent woman be submissive? And the reason I'm mentioning it because the conversation when we're talking amongst
Yeah.
ourselves, it comes up,
Absolutely.
right?
That's
And
it comes up every time.
right, it comes up, like it comes up,
Every
right?
time.
And
Yeah.
so, number one, you're called to be you first. Before you do any other thing, you're called to lead and steward your gifts and talents. Does your partner amplify that? Do you amplify what your partner needs to do for themselves? And then when we come together, what does it look like together? Right. And I think in our communities, we're so hyper independent that we forget like that it's okay to allow someone to amplify and
Join.
encourage
Yeah. It's
and
John.
nurture your gifts and talents. It's not going to take away, but make sure they're doing that. It's not their job to take on
Mm.
your role, and it's not your job to take on theirs. And that can look different. And I'm not saying that you have to be the highest earner or doing all the things,
Mhm.
but know yourself, know your lane, and identify someone that will see value in that and encourage you to be the best in that, whatever that is, and vice versa. And if we look at that as a performing whole, I think that's the secret sauce. Like having the regular meetings to do that, that is the secret sauce. Because if you can't be honest with yourself and your partner, like what are we doing here? Like what are we doing? Because when we're at rock bottom together. And when we're on the high, we're on
Right.
the high together.
On the
So
high together.
um,
Right.
let's just be honest, right? Like
Right.
make it make sense, as you said,
Exactly.
right? The
Make
math
it
needs to
make
be mathing,
sense.
right?
The
So
math is not mathing if you're
yeah,
not leading. So no, I love that. Thank you, ladies. And so to our listeners, let's ensure that we're first, amplifying and making our light as bright as we can. And so when we look for partners, let's ensure they also are doing the same thing for themselves before we look for them to be able to do it. Because sometimes you're looking for something and another individual that they don't have because they haven't honed that skill, right? And so for you now to seek for them to do something for you, they're not doing for themselves, not likely. And I would expand it, like when we talk about relationship, let's use it also for, we're talking about financial literacy, but for our business partners. So when you go to seek partnerships, right? If it's not just an investor, but someone you're going to pair yourself with, look, ensure, are they budgeting their money? How have they handled debt? How have they manage their assets? Do they, are they sporadic? Do they think through decisions carefully and thoughtfully, right? So that your merger and your acquisition with them, as Latoya said, is a successful one and has long-term potential. So the same way we would do it in business, let's also kind of apply to our personal. That way you can be firing on all cylinders, success coming from every angle. So I think we can learn a lot from that. And then looking at the chat as we're winding down, I do have a question here. And so I'm not sure what our panelists' thoughts are on this, if we have any insurance background, but the question is, what's your opinion on borrowing off of your life insurance to use for a down payment on a home? Does anyone have any experience with that or any insurance experience in general?
So I'll jump in because in terms of real estate, I think, again, assess your situation. Dr. Crane mentioned this very early on. Do you have a clear plan to reinvest that money? Because as we all know, like when you take money out of assets that are not taxable or spaces that are non-taxable and you use them for a particular purpose, you may not be taxed on that, but later on, if you don't pay back within the windows, there are impacts, right? So I can't speak to obviously this specific, I don't know the details of this life insurance, or, I don't know the details, but what I can say is you should absolutely leverage the assets that you have, but you should absolutely do that strategically. You should also know what the time horizon is on that. When will you put the money back? What does it look like? And you have to look at, does the interest offset, right? So are you planning to sell this home, hold this home for what purpose? Is it revenue generating, or will you be home poor, right? Like those are valid questions. We often buy homes thinking that it's a permanent forever thing. That's not the case. And we also know most people don't buy homes to keep it forever, right? So I think you need to think about your 5-year plan, your 10-year plan. What do you plan to do with that property? How do you plan to put that money back into the insurance, into your life insurance, if there are penalties for doing so, right? So you really
Right.
have to sit with someone who understands the details of your life insurance policy, because you may end up having to pay the tax on that money as income later on. So I think that's important to recognize. I have friends that have taken out of I think it's their RSP, and that was very useful for them. They renovated full basement, ended up renting out the basement, and now it's cash positive. And so that was a very smart move, right? So I think you really have to look at the full picture, and think about what your cash flow will be or what the investment in is in the time horizon.
Yeah, thank you, Nika. And so I think the takeaway from that is decisions like that are multifaceted, multi-layered. There's often so many moving parts in a decision like that that you want to do it with the most knowledge as possible, right? So talk to your person, like your individual representative, your insurance rep, your insurance agent, etc. But then also seek knowledge from other spaces. Sometimes getting knowledge from the person who may benefit from you financially can itself be a barrier, just the way they'll present that knowledge to you. But knowledge, one of the things I think that this generation has coming up, and earlier more so than I think that I did coming up, is just a quick access to knowledge. A Google search, a Gemini search, an Alexa, Siri will yield so much info. But then you also maybe want to sit with a professional to make sense of that information, to make sure it's relevant to what's going on with you. But I think Anika, she did summarize it as best as she could. Of course, we're not insurance reps, so we can't speak to that specifically. But borrowing and leveraging, whether it's from a dividend, whether it's an RSP, or if you even take, let's say, a line of credit, for example, a low rate one secured and purchase other assets, that is a strategy that can be very viable and get the dial moving in this capitalist world. Getting capital, access to capital, can really move the dial forward. But do it very thoughtfully, approach it with as much knowledge as you can possibly acquire, and then speak with a professional that's skilled. So I'm in finance, and so a lot of times people will say, "Oh yeah, I got a stock tip. I have a friend who's doing this." I'm like, "Okay, who's the person?" "Oh, my buddy, he's a plumber, but on the side he does stock trading." Right? And they'll listen to everybody else in the world except me, who's a professional sitting across from them. And then 6 months later, we meet up, and yeah, it didn't pan out. It didn't work. I was like, yeah, you know what? Sometimes it's hit or miss in that realm, but there are people who are subject matter experts for a reason. People who are professionals for a reason. I find in our community we're sometimes very hesitant to approach those peoples, or those people. I think it could be fear, it could be hesitation. We don't think we're equipped to sit across from them, but don't be hesitant to work with professionals.
So Jermaine,
With that,
I think
sure, go ahead.
just a strategic tax advisor, because sometimes we only think about accountants.
Yes.
A strategic tax advisor will actually map out what their plan is this year, next year, and the next 3 years, because usually it's like your last 2 years. So they will
Right.
do some really good analysis of where you are and where you want to go to map things out accordingly and what that repayment would look like. So like a tax advisor who has no skin in the game, just to be
Would
really
understand.
clear, is
Yeah.
really important. And then also seek out the people like yourself. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Nika. And so, that will help to determine when you get that kind of information, if I'm going to pay tax back at this rate, does it make sense to purchase, right? So businesses do this, like what we're talking about here on a personal level is what businesses do all day, every day. Risk analysis, looking at numbers, projections, does it make sense? And so let's take the same strategies, the same organizational structures that they've often used against us. Let's take those and use those to win, right? Because they've been able to build multi-billion, multi-million institutions. So let's build some of our own, and in the process, let's make our community better. So, ladies, thank you so much. You all, the three of you are fantastic. Just a wealth of knowledge. The chat is better for it. I think our listeners, our audience, will be significantly better for it. I really appreciate you all joining and giving your time. And for our listeners who joined us this afternoon, thank you for being a part of what we're doing here on the 100 ABC Women. I'm partnering with TD now, so looking forward to hopefully joining you guys again at some point in the future. I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Donna rather, and I have her close out for us.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine,